The movie begins by showing a special agent named Tony and his friend named Juan. At that time, Tony, Juan and the police were rushing to raid the place where illegal goods were being sold. In the car, Juan told Tony that his wife was pregnant and that Juan would soon have children. Hearing this, Tony was very sympathetic because Juan had long wanted a child. Short story: when arriving at the location of the raid, Tony told Juan to just relax in the car and he will handle this case with his subordinates. After that, the people in the building were immediately detained and will immediately be taken to the police station. Then Tony and some of his men went upstairs until they met a dealer and a woman who was making a transaction. There Tony also met a bodyguard who looked relaxed even though he was about to be arrested.
Is everything okay? No dispares.
When they were about to be taken downstairs, but suddenly the bodyguard grabbed the police's weapon. Then there was a shootout.
Well, I like the two-bedroom.
Meanwhile, Juan, who was in the car, was contacted by his wife because his wife was craving food. His wife asked Juan to buy it for her when Juan's work was finished. At the same time, the bodyguard who was about to run away ran into Juan until finally he managed to shoot Juan to death. Tony, who saw his best friend dead, certainly felt very hurt towards the bodyguard. Then the scene switches to an old man named Nick, who is relaxing on the boat he has made his floating home. Not long after that, a friend of his who worked in the government arrived. Here his friend said that the government wanted to collaborate again with Nick to carry out a mission. It is known that he was a former assassin who often worked for the government. Hearing this invitation, Nick refused because he had retired a long time ago, especially since he was no longer young. However, after being persuaded and given a large monetary reward, Nick finally accepted the mission.
I got $600,000 in this bank for to a number of terrorist organizations.
It turns out that the mission was to eliminate a group of dealers who wanted to bring down the American economy. On the other hand, Tony, who is now in his office, still seems to feel very lost about the departure of his best friend. Then his boss advised Tony to take leave, but Tony refused because he wanted to keep working. After a while, Tony's wife arrived, who was very pregnant. She immediately poured out her sadness to Tony. She also asked Tony to immediately find and prosecute her husband's killer. Tony calmed her down and promised he would find him. After that, Tony and his superior entered the interrogation room. In the room, the two of them interrogated the drug dealer they had just arrested. In his interrogation, the dealer explained that his big boss was not an ordinary supplier. And not just supplying because the boss has a big plan. Interestingly, the dealer stated that he would provide this information as long as he was given a reduced sentence. Apart from that, he wanted to sleep for a while in the hotel room before serving time behind bars. Hearing this condition seems unreasonable. Even so, Tony's superiors or the police really need this information. So the police were forced to comply with his wishes. The scene shifts to Nick, who has prepared all the equipment for his mission. Starting from weapons to making the vehicle set so that no one can recognize it. And he already knew the target information for his mission. Nick rushed to a location. There Nick immediately disguised himself as a general public, but his gaze was watching a hotel where his target was located. Then, when he felt it was time, Nick rushed to a rooftop opposite the hotel, carrying his favorite rifle in a golf bag. Nick then aimed at his target. It seemed that the person he was aiming at was the dealer who was relaxing at the hotel. Because not long after, Tony was seen coming to the hotel to pick up the dealer to take him back to the cell. Nick didn't let go of his aim at all until Tony had taken the dealer out of the hotel to get into the vehicle. Nick then violently shot the dealer until he died instantly. Tony, who was beside him, was clearly shocked because he didn't think something like that would happen. Tony immediately rushed to the location where the shooter was thought to be. There it coincided with Nick, who had just come downstairs. The two of them passed each other, but Tony didn't realize that the shooter was the old man who passed him. Then after that incident, the police had to lose their informant. But this didn't last long because his boss, Tony, got the information from his spies. It also turns out that the dealer is part of a network of a group which is now suspected of having transactions somewhere. Tony was ordered to supervise the group. Hearing this, Tony rushed to do his job. Then Tony and the others were seen starting by monitoring movements via CCTV. But Tony couldn't hear anything because the surveillance camera was only hacked without any sound being heard. Therefore, Tony took the initiative to enter the place disguised as a customer. But it turned out that Tony was only allowed to be outside because inside the glass room was only for VIP customers.
Get over here.
That's the VIP section.
Then Tony saw a female chef who was about to leave the place to buy some food ingredients. Tony immediately followed the female chef. When he was outside, Tony approached the woman and immediately asked her to get to know him. However, the woman refused and hurried away. But after Tony showed that he was a member of DIA, the woman finally wanted to chat with Tony. And it is known that this woman is named Mina. Here Tony asks Mina to help him put the recording device on the table in the VIP room where Mina works. At first Mina refused because if she was found out she would definitely be fired by her boss. But after being persuaded, Mina finally agreed.
There's only one way to find out.
That evening, it was seen on CCTV that Mina put away the recording device that Tony had previously given her. Meanwhile, Nick was apparently watching the place to carry out his mission. A group of people were seen entering and going to talk in the room. When they were being watched, the group actually moved places. So Tony couldn't know what they were going to talk about.
What the fuck are they doing?
Meanwhile, Nick started to go inside via the emergency exit. Here we are finally introduced to a big boss named Rafi. Apart from being a supplier of illicit goods, it turns out that Rafi wants to completely paralyze the American economy. In order to realize his plan, he even hired a scientist to make a sophisticated tool. It turns out that with the sophisticated equipment that the scientist is working on, they can turn off an entire city's electricity with just a cell phone. Not long after that, Nick came and attacked them. This incident resulted in several of Rafi's bodyguards being killed, including his trusted people. While Rafi, the scientist, and his remaining subordinates managed to escape. Then Tony came there, but the war was over. The next day Mina was going to work. She was shocked because the building where Mina worked had now been closed by the police.
The money you already own.
On the other hand, the scientist was asked by Rafi to immediately complete his sophisticated tool because last night's tool was still in the experimental stage. The scientist wanted to solve this, but on the condition that Rafi had to pay him $50 million. And here Rafi finally agreed.
50 million.
On a different day there appeared to be a party held by Rafi's older sister. There it appears that she invited many guests to her event. It looks like Tony was also there because he deliberately wanted to find out Rafi's whereabouts. Tony then did not hesitate to ask his older sister where Rafi was. But his older sister didn't know it. In a different place, Rafi and his men, including the big man who killed Juan, were seen there, monitoring a party held by Rafi's older sister. The big man seemed to recognize Tony, who was at the party. He also reported to Rafi that Tony was a drug eradication policeman who had raided his headquarters. Rafi immediately ordered his men to approach Tony. Apart from that, at the party, Tony also met Mina, who turned out to be the chef there. Not only that, after a while he saw Nick's presence. When he tried to check on him, Tony lost him. Tony then looks for him and tries to chase him with Mina. But in the chase Tony lost track of Nick. Tony's failure to chase Nick made him try again. It seems that Tony is now getting ready at the place where he lost track of Nick. And after waiting quite a long time, he finally saw Nick's car passing in front of him. Without wasting any time, Tony chased him and stopped him. Tony then immediately asked for Nick's identity, which surprised Tony. Because it turns out that Nick is his biological father who abandoned him a long time ago.
Hi, Dad.
After his identity was revealed, Tony was then invited by Nick to join him at his residence on the dock. There, Tony immediately asked why Nick left him when he was a teenager and when his mother had just died. Nick honestly explained the reason that Nick was actually an assassin hired by the government. So when he found out that Tony's mother had been killed by Nick's enemies, he decided to leave Tony for the sake of his son's safety. Hearing this explanation, Tony understood and accepted it. Apart from that, Nick also explained that the mission that Nick is currently carrying out is the same as that which is being carried out by Tony. Namely hunting down Rafi and his group who have plans to paralyze the American economy. Then after a long conversation between father and son who had just met, Tony left. When Tony was about to leave, Nick gave Tony a cell phone so they could communicate with each other. Then not long afterward it turned out that Tony was being watched by Rafi's men, and now it was seen that they immediately ambushed Tony and took him. Long story short, now Tony is at Rafi's headquarters and is being held hostage. Rafi also asked Tony about the identity of the person who killed Rafi's men. Tony casually said that it was his biological father's doing. Seeing Tony's fearless style, Rafi then ordered his men to torture Tony before he finished him off. On the other hand, Nick was going towards where Tony was now being tortured. It turned out that the cell phone previously given to Tony had GPS installed so that Nick could easily find out Tony's whereabouts. A few minutes after that, suddenly the electricity there went dead. It turned out that Nick was already in the room and finished off Rafi's group. Then Nick took Tony back to his floating house for immediate treatment. After that incident, the police, including Tony's superiors, came, and they only found several of Rafi's men who had died. Here Tony's boss also finally finds the tool that Rafi will use to destroy the country's economy. The following night, when Tony was talking to Nick, Mina suddenly contacted him. It turns out that currently Mina is being held hostage by the bodyguard. The bodyguard asked Tony to come to him right now. Tony rushed to leave, but Nick asked Tony not to be careless. And Nick will go there.
Why you end up like me?
Long story short, when he got there, Tony approached the bodyguard who was currently holding Mina hostage. Here the bodyguard asked Tony to tell his father to come here too. But suddenly, Nick shot the bodyguard in the shoulder. After the bodyguard was cornered, Nick came and asked where Rafi was now. In the end, the bodyguard was willing to take them to Rafi's residence, but on the condition that he asked for $1 million.
You keep the million. Fuck I will.
The scene moves to Rafi's residence. It looks like the scientist is asking for half of the money to be paid now because his family is in need of money. Rafi said that he couldn't pay for it because the equipment was now in the hands of the police.
You're the only one who can do it.
Rafi's older sister who saw this was very shocked because she had just found out that Rafi was a criminal. Not long after, the bodyguard came, pointing a gun at Nick. And carrying a bag of corpses, namely Tony. When the body bag was opened, it turned out to be Tony pretending to be dead. The bodyguard said that Rafi was very stingy, so he was forced to betray him. Then Nick told Rafi's older sister to leave because he knew his older sister didn't know anything about Rafi's crime. Then Rafi's group tried to attack, but Tony and his father were able to easily finish them all off, including Rafi. After that, the bodyguard charged Nick for $1 million, but Nick said,
Get a job.
30 minutes later the police came to the place, and they only found Rafi and all his men who had been killed. They also found a body bag, and when it was opened it turned out to be the bodyguard. Several years later it turns out that Tony is now married to Mina and has one child. They also now live in a floating house just like Nick. Not only that, now Nick also has a new wife. Here Nick invites them to just live in a luxurious house because Nick already has a lot of savings.
There you go.
Not long after, Nick's friend contacted him again, inviting Grandpa and Tony to complete a new mission for 5 times the payment. And the movie is over. Thank you for watching. Look forward to the next video.